Hello and welcome back. We are going to continue with our learning on box and whisker plots. For these next couple questions, however, we are going to focus on interpreting box and whisker plots. So we're not going to focus on making them. We spent a lot of time learning how to make them, how to find your 5-number summary. But for these questions, we're really just going to focus on finding some information about the data that's given to us. So for this first example, it says the box and whisker plot below shows the test scores of several students. Okay, and they're going to ask us some questions about this. Now, a couple things before we get started here. I just want to remind you about your box and whisker plot. So when you have a box and whisker plot, okay, first of all, this is going to be your minimum, your maximum, your Q1 is the left side of the box, your medians in the middle, and then your Q3 is the right side of the box. Okay, and then also when we're looking at box and whisker plots, your box and whisker plot has 4 parts. So this part, the first whisker, the left half of the box is your second part, the right half of your box is your third part, and then the last whisker is your fourth part. So if you think about it, if this is all the data, this is 100% of the data. So that means that each piece of this box and whisker plot is 25% of the data. And that's going to be really important when we're looking at some interpreting questions. So let's look at some of the questions they ask us. What was the highest test score? So your maximum, taking a look there, it looks like it was about 100. What was the lowest test score? So we're looking for our minimum there, which would be 50. What's the median? So your median's this line right here, so it looks to be right between 80 and 90, which would be 85. What was the range of the test scores? So your range is going to be your maximum minus your minimum. So our maximum is 100, our minimum is 50, so if we subtract those, the range of the data is 50. What was the interquartile range? So interquartile range is different than the range itself. The range is the range of the entire data set. For interquartile range, you're just looking for the difference between the 2 quartiles. So interquartile range would be Q3 minus Q1. So your Q3 value is here at 90. Your Q1 is at 70. So if you subtract them, you get an IQR of 20. Okay, so when you are interpreting box and whisker plots, you're going to be given the box and whisker plot. You just need to know how to pull data out of it. So let's take a look at a couple other examples here. I have one more box and whisker plot I want you to look at. It says the box and whisker plot shows the test scores of several students. Okay, so we're still looking at our test scores here. Now, once again, just to remember the different pieces here, here's your minimum, here's your maximum, your Q1, your median, and then this part right here would be your Q3. And then each piece of the box and whisker plot is 25% of the data. So this whisker is 25%, 25%. This half of the box is 25%, and this whisker is 25%. So because all of the data is 100% and this box and whisker plot is split into 4 even parts, each piece is 25%. Now I want you to keep that in mind, because where students get confused is they'll see that this piece of the box is tiny. So they're like, well, that's not 1/4 of the data. You just want to remember each piece is always 25% regardless of how large it appears on the graph. It's 25% of the data. Okay, so let's answer some questions about percentages here. What percent of students scored between a 50 and a 70? So we're looking from here to here on our box and whisker plot. So notice from 50 to 70, that's 25% of the data. What percent of students scored between a 70, so 70 is right here, and a 100? So between 70 and 100, you have 3 pieces of the box and whisker plot. So that means that there's a total of 75% of the data. 25% from here to here, 25% from here to here, and 25% from here to here. So that's a total of 75%. So you're really looking at how many pieces of the box and whisker plot are contained between those two numbers that they give you. So between 70 and 100, there are 3 pieces of our box and whisker plot. If each piece is 25%, that means 75%. What percent of the scores are below an 85? So an 85 is our median. So if you look at, here's 85. There are 2 pieces of the box and whisker plot below 85, so that would be a total of 50%. What percent of the scores are above a 90? So here's my 90, and I only have my 1 whisker above 90, so that's 25%. What percent of students score between a 70 and a 90? So 70 and 90. So between 70 and 90, there are 2 pieces of my box and whisker plot. So 25% here, 25% here. Gives me a total of 50%. Now, question 6 is a little different from question 5. It says, how many students scored between a 70 and a 90 on the test? So they're not asking me for the percentage, they're asking me how many. Okay, so for this question, all right, at the beginning here, we were told that there was a total of 40 students. Okay, so let's assume there are a total of 40 students. How many of the students scored between a 70 and a 90? Well, a 70 and a 90 is 50% of the data. So between 70 and 90 is 50% of the data. Now, if we want to know how many students that is, you need to look back in the problem and figure out what the total was. Our total here was 40 students. So 50% of 40 students, we would just take our 0.5 times 40, we get 20 students. So that total number of students has to be given to you. You can't come up with that number, okay? So I'm telling you our total here was 40, okay? And if you're given another type of problem, it'll be in the problem explanation where they're describing the scenario. There was a total of 40 students here, so if I want to figure out how many students scored between a 70 and a 90, that's 50%, but then 50% of 40 is 20 students. Okay, and our last question, approximately 25% of the data is greater than what value? Well, if you look at our box and whisker plot, if we're looking for a number that has 25% of the data above it, that would be our number right here of 90. So if you look at 90, there's 1 whisker above 90, which is 25% of the data. So our data value is 90. So it is really helpful when you're doing these to start before you answer any questions, label the different parts of the box and whisker plot, label where the percentages are. Each piece of that box and whisker plot, remember, is 25%.